The first time the myth met the state, it was far from poetic. It was procedural, a voice that didn't care about my inner symbolism or journey, a boundary that didn't negotiate with my story. I remember how small my words sounded once judicial authority entered the room, not cosmic authority, police authority, the court's authority, the kind that exists because actions land in the real world. And the real world has consequences. In that moment, the mind wants to sprint. It wants to explain spirituality. It wants to persuade with spirituality. I am forced to stand inside the simplest law of the labyrinth. Meaning never cancels consequence. And the mythic mirror that rises is the samsara cycle, round and round, cause and effect, not as a punishment, as mechanics. You don't meditate your way out of gravity. You don't interpret your way out of accountability. What made it more sobering was realizing that this was not just a legal problem. It was also a spiritual test of conduct under pressure. Could I stay regulated enough to stop feeding the spiral with performance? Could I hold spiritual ground in a hostile system without turning that phrase into ego? Psychology might call it reality testing under stress. When the nervous system is activated, the mind's stories get louder, but the environment still demands compliance. The modern temple of power does not ask what your symbolism meant. It asks what happened, what was done, what risk exists now. So the practice becomes humble and physical. Slow breath, feet on the ground. Short, straight to the point sentences. Cooperation with what's lawful. I don't escalate. I don't dramatize. I notice how quickly fear tries to turn into defiance, and how defiance would only deepen the descent. The thread right here is discipline in the smallest form. Comply, regulate, ask for support, accept what I triggered. I keep thinking about sleep, even here, because if I don't rest, I will misread and misinterpret everything that happens next. I let the lesson stay clean. In samsara, choices matter. The way out is not a grand revelation. It's responsible behavior, repeated until the cycle loosens its grip. The next corridor doesn't feel like an underworld because it's dark. It feels like an underworld because it's contained. Doors, schedules, observations, a place designed to stabilize chaos. By limiting movement, limiting choice, limiting self-definition. The lived moment is a psychiatric containment environment, and it hits me like a compression, like a ton of bricks. My inner language is huge, mythic, alive. The institutional language is narrow, clinical, functional. It wants categories, not poetry. Part of me feels rage at that narrowing. Part of me feels relief because the nervous system has been running hot, and containment is one way a society tries to keep a person and everyone around them safe. The mythic mirror here is Attar's conference of birds. In the story, the birds travel together, each carrying a wound, each resisting the path of their own way until the journey forces them to confront what they cannot escape inside themselves. In hindsight, that's what a ward can become. An unwilling pilgrimage, not romantic, not mythic, not chosen, but still a passage where the ego loses its preferred costumes. Psychology might call this an external container. When internal regulation is failing, a structure imposed from the outside, because my structure inside isn't holding steady. And here's the hard humility. I can resent it and still need it. Both can be true. This is also where the modern confusion becomes obvious. Some experiences may carry spiritual meaning. Some may be psycho-spiritual crisis rather than simple pathology. But when modern people have similar openings without containers, the result can become dangerous, fast. Institutions then respond with blunt tools because danger is easier to categorize than subtlety. Traditional systems sometimes distinguished between delusion, crisis, obsession, illumination, and complete madness. Modern systems often do not. Still, none of that exempts me from the immediate facts. So I practice the thread inside the limits imposed upon me. I stop arguing with the walls. I focus on what I can do. I understand that I am living within Plato's self-prescribed cave. I remember law and consequence. Again, this place exists because something has already overflowed. I ask for community rather than an audience. I let one honest connection matter more than my self-image. If there is a conference, I am one bird among many, learning the same lesson. Stability first, then meaning. After a while, I start hearing how narratives get built. Not my narrative, the institutional one. Notes become a kind of spell. A few phrases repeated in the same tone can replace an entire human being. The lived anchor is simple. Institutional language replaces personal narratives. I speak, but what counts is what's written down. I explain context, but what carries weight is the category that gets assigned. Even my silence can be interpreted. Even my urgency can be translated into suspicion. And the mythic mirror is soul fragmentation. In Siberian shamanism, the story goes that a person can lose parts of the soul through shock, through terror, or through rupture. And the healer's work is to retrieve what was scattered. In this modern corridor, fragmentation happens through paperwork as much as through panic. Parts of me get separated. The frightened part, the angry part, the ashamed part, the part that still wants to live responsibly. The system doesn't see parts. It sees a file or a classification. The place itself begins to feel like ritual theater. Language, roles, power, interpretation, all moving inside a formal frame. One that I did not design and one that I could not control. Psychology might call it depersonalization through labeling. When complex inner life gets reduced to a manageable description, the person can start relating to themselves as an object. That's dangerous because it can deepen disassociation and spike despair. Language matters more than people think. Call a threshold only a disorder, and one kind of reality appears. Call everything sacred, and another kind of danger appears. I had to find a third position, one where the words being used around me did not ease the work I still had to do inside myself. So I fight fragmentation with simple integration. I name my feelings privately. I write down what I know is true. I'm in a process and I'm responsible for my choices and my behavior. I regulate my body. I keep my tone calm because calm is a form of self-protection. I always try to seek clarity, and I remember that one grounded, solid relationship can hold the thread when institutional language tries to overwrite the human perspective. I don't need the system to speak to my soul. I need to keep my soul intact while moving through the system. There's a particular kind of stripping that happens when you become a case. You get called by the wrong name. You get spoken about as if you are not there. Decisions happen in rooms you are not invited into. The lived anchor is identity stripped down to category, and it creates a cold emptiness in the body. I can feel the mind wanting to revolt against this, wanting to reclaim dignity through intensity. But intensity is not dignity. Dignity is steadiness. Dignity is choosing behavior you can stand behind later. The mythic mirror is the animist spirit world where everything has life, everything has agency, everything has relationship, wind and stone and fire and water and ancestors and animals. In that worldview, a person is never just a label. You are a node in a living web which is seen and unseen. In the modern underworld, the web is replaced by a chart. Psychology might call this social death in miniature, the reduction of personhood to function. And the risk is that I start believing it as truth and law, that I start speaking about myself as if I'm only what they see, what they say, and what they write. So I practice a quiet animism, even here, even when nobody knows, not by breaking rules, by remembering relationships. I relate to my own breath like it's sacred because it keeps me alive. I relate to the food I eat like medicine because it nourishes and feeds me. I relate to sleep like a bridge back to reality and a crossing point between worlds. I remember other people with respect because community is a protective factor. Whether the room calls it that or not, I accept lawful boundaries. I keep consequences in view. I stop fantasizing about heroic resistance and choose practical cooperation, and I stop trying to win the narrative. I aim to stabilize the nervous system. In that stripping, a simpler identity remains. A man responsible for his body, for his soul, for his behavior, and for his repair. Categories can describe me, but they don't get to define me. My soul is what defines me. What survives the stripping is ordinary practice. Small acts repeated without applause and admiration. Eating properly, resting when possible, speaking and acting cleanly, keeping one line of truth alive. That is how personhood survives reduction. Eventually, a strange thing happens. The pain doesn't disappear, but perspective appears. I start watching the system as a system. The patterns, the roles, the incentives, how fear moves through staff and patients alike, how compliance is rewarded, how escalation spreads, how calm is contagious. The lived anchor is observation of system dynamics from within. And it's the first time in a while I feel meta-cognitive distance, like I can stand one step back from the storm. Inside my own head, I notice that I can choose my next 10 minutes, even if I can't control the whole situation. The mythic mirror is chaos before creation. In multiple mythologies, the world begins in formlessness. Waters without shape, darkness without order, a raw field where everything can happen. Then a boundary appears, a division, a name, a first act of structure. That is what I am witnessing here. A society trying to draw lines around chaos, so something livable can re-emerge. Another mirror appears too. Prison as monastery, the cell as alembic, the place of confinement, becoming an unwilling vessel where rage, fear, and despair can be cooked into clarity if the person stops fighting every second of it. Historical parallels flicker at the edge. Saints, revolutionaries, prisoners of conscience, people who discover that the strict routine, the archaic repetitions, and the lack of choice can become potent and fertile material for inner work if they can be held correctly. Psychology might call this the return of executive function, the brain reassessing planning and observation after a period of overload. It doesn't make the experience special or noble. It makes it viable and it makes it workable. And with that comes another possibility, the ability to hold spiritual ground in a hostile system without turning that into heroic fantasy. The holy warrior image only helps if it means disciplined courage, not self-inflation and self-importance. The Bodhisattva image only helps if it means remaining human and compassionate in a place that others want to flee, not imagining myself as some martyr above the room. So I return to the thread with renewed seriousness. I reconstruct whatever simple sadhana I can inside the limits of my situation through breath, repetition, mantra, prayer, movement, always remembering the line that steadies rather than the line that inflates. And I hold one final truth, the same one we keep coming back to over and over again. Meaning never cancels consequence, but consequence doesn't cancel meaning either. If I can learn to stay responsible in the modern underworld, I can carry that discipline back to ordinary life. That's the only kind of myth that matters. One that returns with a man who can live.